Yes, so myself and Adam both work for a company called Nova in Liverpool. So we're like a venture capital company who looks at idea stage tech businesses and tries to mentor them to the point to receive investment. And then we have a team that builds the product, takes it to market, and hopefully allows a lot of kind of incomplete founding teams or very early stage founders to build their companies. And so obviously a big part of what we do is meet founders and very quickly try to identify, is there something in this idea? Is there not? If there is, where are the risks? How do we tackle it systematically in order to build up an evidence case? And critically, when you're dealing with someone's idea, obviously it is very personal to them, so you need the right sort of language to explain that I'm not saying that the idea is bad, just this isolated part of it really needs tackling head on. And you see it all the time with startups who want to remain pre-revenue for as long as possible because they're scared that no one's really going to pay them. And really what we do is try and tackle that head on. Should be a lean canvas document in your folder. Is anyone familiar with one of these before?
I did the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Programme and they had a massive session
on the lean canvas or the business model canvas?
on the lean canvas.
Perfect. So I'll be teaching you to suck eggs, but
One of the other reasons for this is we play this out purely to mitigate that whole confrontation of saying that someone's baby's ugly and just saying we actually say, right, it's evidence-based innovation. So all we're asking for is evidence that what you're saying is correct. So testing those assumptions and testing those the biggest risk. That's ultimately what they're saying.
Exactly. So the lean canvas is basically a kind of a one-page business plan, but rather than a typical business plan, that no one wants to write, no one wants to read, and ultimately they're out of date the second you finish writing them, especially if you've tried to predict financials, 3 years in advance on an unproven technology. We try and look at the here and now, so it's very much a snapshot of where they're up to. So they'll have all completed one of these by the time you meet them. So this is where the business is, and it should be a bit easier for you guys to work out, okay, well, these are the areas maybe we should focus next. There was a business model canvas, which is very good for quite large companies trying to take new products into even new or existing markets, but it's not particularly good for someone who's got maybe just an idea and needs to kind of go and get all that validation through all the way. However, the way we use this in Nova is this canvas will continue to be updated at every investment point. So even though we use it at the early stage, a business coming out 12 months later will also have one of these. It's just far more advanced in its thinking. A living document, exactly. So I thought we'll just go through it, give you guys some tips in each of the boxes, use Facebook as an example just so that, kind of reverse engineered, thank you very much, all being honest, but at least it will give them some context. And then they'll get the exact same talk from us. So hopefully when you guys go in, especially if you're dealing with someone who is very verbose, very excitable, you've got something that will help really focus the conversation. And luckily about this canvas, it is in an order. So I believe there's an order already in the numbers printed. So if you're not sure where the riskiest part to start is, you can typically follow these numbers and that kind of builds up a nice foundation for the company.
And they'll have it for the speak dates once they deal with that.
Yes, so we'll have done a session with them out and they'll actually have completed it for their business, but we won't have a time to feed back on it. So what will be coming will be their thoughts rather than potentially what is the business. And a large part, I think, of your job will be to work out what's truth and what's essentially fiction, or yet to be proven, maybe, is the better way to say it. So we always like to start with these two sides. They will typically start with the solution. I want to build app to do X, or VR, AI, blockchain to do Y. We try to think, okay, really accurately describe who is the customer and who is the user, what are they facing, what are their problems, and I like to ask always very early on, what is the issue with the existing alternatives? Because it forces them to take their attention away from their idea for a moment and actually articulate, okay, yes, there is some big enterprise software, but it's very expensive. We want to do it cheaper. Or, yes, CDs are great, but wouldn't it be good if you could have multiple artists on one device? And it's not until you look into those existing alternatives that you can kind of see the wood from the trees typically. So we always start with those two. Early adopters as well as a subsection on the customer segment is really important. So how many times will you hear, who's your product for? I once heard there are 3 billion smartphone devices in the world, so that's my market. I don't know how you're going to market to all of those people. And again, it's very critical that they can articulate why someone would use something now while it's suboptimal because they have a serious problem. They're a real early adopter. Typically, it takes about 20 minutes to do one of these, so 9 boxes, 2 minutes each. And at the end, there is a video from the creator, called a guy called Ash Moira, detailing basically what we're going to go through again in case anyone needs a refresher after that. So again, I've reverse engineered the Facebook example. This canvas didn't exist then, but we can hopefully put ourselves in that mind. So yeah, if we start with the problems, it's about keeping it, articulating it well, keeping it simple. It's top 1 to 3 problems. Obviously, a one-page business plan forces the most important aspects of the business plan to come to the top. So these 3 points, you know, they're really critical that they get this right. Typically, it's around cost, quality, speed, maybe access, something like this, but you kind of see the same problems coming up in different sectors. One way to think about it is, what type of problem is this? Is it an expensive problem? Is it a frequent problem that happens to the users? Is it a mandatory problem? So is it regulatory-led? Is it legislation-led? These are all extra power. And if you can obviously get the problem completely nailed, like my mission is to help companies deal with GDPR regulation without going to an in-house lawyer, then actually the solution can become quite flexible. It could be a set of algorithms and products. It could be a marketplace that connects you to cheap legal advice. But we need to be completely clear on the problem so that we're allowed that flexibility when it comes to the solution.
There are other sort of techniques like this. A common one is the A to Z customer journey. So actually just taking yourself through it. For instance, so if I want to do X, I do this, then I do that, and it involves this person and that person. And that sort of highlights the pain points along the way, and like unmet needs or things like that, or failure points in the process. You can say, right, well, I thought it was this, but it's actually earlier up in the process, and then you can help sort of really focus in on that niche core problem.
Exactly. We find this especially useful in the more complicated sort of, I've got a healthcare business and I want to reduce A&E waiting times. Okay, seriously, take me through where do I go from I've got an injury all the way through to I've finally been seen. And then if they propose another journey, like which is the 2B, you kind of get this nice parallel, but you know exactly which parts you're trying to solve. We want to reduce the consultations by 30%. We want to save time in the meeting. So it's quite a nice way. And if they haven't got this box sorted, or the customer box, there really isn't too much point going into the other boxes. These are the foundations from which we kind of build. So again, go through this nice and quick, but Facebook's user problems, there obviously was social networks. They didn't need to invent one. We had MySpace as well as typically, email lists and groups, Bebo, all great social medias. But the problem was, if you were on a college campus, which is almost a real life social media, there was no way to easily find people, connect with them. So it was all about digitizing that, but doing it better than the existing alternatives. And for the customer problem, they actually didn't solve this for a little bit until they'd got the users all on board. But traditional advertising at the time was very outbound, very billboardy, very expensive, and you couldn't really target the people that you wanted to target with your product. So these were the two problems on either side, and it wasn't until they solved those, obviously, that they were able to make a full business out of it. And obviously, if they haven't got experience with the customer segment, they need to be able to articulate why they feel this way. So if they're not the user themselves, then who have they spoke to? What type of validation have they got from the market? Have they spoke to anyone who's experienced this? And that would, rather than you having to say, I don't think your customer segment exists, you can say, show me, speak to me. Who is this person? Describe them. Give me a name. Give me one person who this is for. So I try to never basically say no, or that not only because it's a difficult conversation, but what do I know? I could think an idea is ridiculous, but then they go get 10,000 people to sign up, and I'd look silly. So it's very much about, have you got the evidence? If not, show me how. And if you haven't got it, let me tell you how you should go get it. And it's almost always better definition in problem and customer.
Even if they're a marketplace play, for example, it's like just saying, right, on the supply side, who have you spoken to, on the demand side, who have you spoken to? And where's that synergy?
Yeah. Again, you'll hear all the time, I want to take away the middleman for recruitment. It's a very, very popular one for the last 5 years. And they'll have been, why? Well, I was looking for a job recently and it wasn't good. Okay, cool. Which recruiters and which employers have you spoke to? Oh, none. I need to get my funding so I can go do that. And it's crazy, you need to hear from them directly what their problems are in order to fix it. Again, customer segment, for me, it's the early adopter part that's really, really important. And I wouldn't even accept sort of students as an early adopter. Again, I think that's too vague. I think it needs to be, I'm a student who cares about the environment. I earn 30 grand a year and I'm willing to buy, this product to solve my issue. So this is where you can really focus them in. Many founders are worried about being too niche. They think, they're going to limit themselves somehow to the rest of the market, and that's going to be them stuck forever. But, almost all big companies have started very specifically with a niche and worked out. My favorite example is PayPal. So, voted the worst idea on the internet in 1999. Who'd have thought? Their early adopter segment was people who sell junk online, people who sold stuff on eBay. There was about 30,000 of them, and no one would really describe that segment as that's a really attractive market segment. Let's go get the people who sell junk online. But they were sending checks in the mail at the time, so they were waiting 2 weeks to get their money post selling a product. So their pain was so big that they were willing to use the worst idea on the internet to overcome it. Obviously, through that then, they went out to the rest of the market, more to e-commerce, to peer-to-peer, got bought by eBay along the way, and then I think they became bigger than eBay and span back out of it. But they could have been worried that they were over-niching into quite an unattractive market segment, but it turned out, because they had the pain, that it was the right place to start. So it's better, especially for an early-stage startup with minimal time and resource, to be really laser-focused on who they're going to work with rather than too broad. So it's always better to be more specific than not. So we knew, for instance, so you could have said college students was the adopter to Facebook, but again, they went even more niche. You could have said it was Ivy League, the top unis. Again, too big. Harvard, let's get it working in one campus in the country, get everyone on board, then we'll scale. They went to Ivy League, then they went to college, then they let mums on Facebook, they ruined it, and that was the death of that social media platform. But it still went through, adding logs to the fire, starting really, really specifically. Their customers actually they wouldn't have known at the time, but there has been a trend of quite specific advertisers that work really well on Facebook. Cool, so the part that they'll really want to talk to you about is a part where we actually haven't given them much space. So this is not tell me every feature on your platform. In fact, it's not even really tell me about the product. It's what's the benefit and value of using your journey. And if we go back to what Adam was saying with the as is and the to be, so the journey currently is expensive, it's time consuming, and the level of service is not good, then we know the solution needs to be faster, cheaper, and have a good level of service. What we're not doing is saying, and to do that, there's going to be an app matching system with reviews and filters, and because we shouldn't be so prescriptive. It's a very iterative process to build these tech products. So the way I always separate it out is Airbnb's solution is to save money when you're traveling, make money when you're hosting, and share culture with someone who lives there. Their product is filter by city, look at reviews, book a room, all these additional things that allow you to do that. But especially for an early stage, you want to avoid them getting too solution biased. You want to avoid them drawing up huge specifications for products that they haven't really engaged fully with the user yet. The number one cause of startup failure is still building something that nobody wants, which isn't just shocking, but it's like the saddest way to fail, like to do something really well with lots of energy and conviction that isn't needed. So it's worth taking the time at the beginning, and this is a pushback you'll have that you're maybe slowing them down. It's worth taking the time and really understanding the solution, the problem, the customer, so that we buy ourselves time to work out what a good product will look like.
If you're over sort of focusing on a particular domain like AR or VR or AI or whatever, it's like that's not the solution. That's an applied product to a solution. It's like that may change in 18 months. There might be a new something we don't know about that gets invented. It's like focused and double down more on this area, but it doesn't allow you to sort of pivot and be tech agnostic. And
we mostly get pitched products, and then it's our job to convince them that they're not actually at that stage and they're pitching a whole holistic company with a solution. So we even though we're a product development company, at least 50% of us are, we try and avoid that for 4 or 5 months in actually, because we want them to see the value in delivering a solution. And once you haven't got a product, it becomes a bit more experiential. Like, could you go and prove it out without a product? Could you go test it? Could you be the software? Could you concierge it? If they wanted, a report on their spending, do you need to build a £2 million algorithm that's FCA approved, or could you find one person in the world who would actually let you build up a report on their finances? Again, maybe not the best example, but the goal idea being that you shouldn't need product to deliver value, and actually you should only build product to deliver value that you can. So they'll want to talk about this a lot. make sure it links to the problem. So you've put here that you want to build an app that matches people to their preferred driving instructor. Which problem specifically is this solving, or is it a bit of a vanity feature, in fact? Yeah, so again, we didn't try not to go too product focused, but what Facebook knew it needed to do was to digitize the real world network. They knew people wanted to find other people like them within their network. It was all about finding friends easily. How we do that can be defined later, but it has to be paramount that we can find the people we want. And we need to be able to create a page of our own, make it social, share media, share network. The reason that we know we need to be able to share updates and information is that our customer wants to have highly targeted ads. So each part of the solution hasn't gone into spec, but it's very clear as to why that would be better than the existing alternatives. If you've got any questions as we're going, by the way, please, it's only the 6 of us, so we can... Right, so probably the most difficult, in my opinion, of all the boxes I've got some nodding, to fill in is how can you clearly compel why someone should work with you? It's your one-liner. It's not necessarily marketing speak, it's not kind of just do it, but it's the reason for why someone would do it. So you've got 2 options here. If you really, in my opinion, if you're really struggling to create the UVP with a founder, it means you don't quite know where the value is. So you might be better off focusing on the high level concept, which just gives people a context to jump off of. So you've got on here, it says, YouTube is Flickr for videos, Alien is Jaws in space. So once you know that, you can at least have a conversation based off that. I'm building LinkedIn for footballers, right? So from there we can go. Once you know a bit more about your user though, you should be able to say something like, we save football clubs lots of time and money by connecting them directly to talented individuals for a fraction of the cost that an agent would. That would be a clear UVP to why someone like that would work with you. Again, we've kind of reimagined this one a little bit, but user connect online with your friends when you're not together, but the customer one really is just reach your target audience at a fraction of the cost, and that would be the first thing you said to any advertiser if you were out pitching Facebook's business arm. The difficulty here is the more words you use, the easier it is to describe, and you want to try and create something that's fairly concise. If I'm sending people out to speak to people, I do try and work on this a little bit because they need that 1 line, 2 lines to get themselves in the door and show credibility, and then they can go and ask questions about the problem, the customer, etc. So it might be worth spending a bit of time, and actually something's better than nothing. So if you just got something you're not overly happy with, but it is specific and it does kind of explain what it is, it might not sound the best, it's better to give them that as a jumping off point. And it's on them to go refine that. Every conversation should be leading back into the UVP. So something I like to do when I'm mentoring people is ask, how is it changing? How have the last conversations impacted how we're now articulating what we do? A lot of them as well might not even be able to give you the high level concept, which says to me, right, let's put the brakes a little bit and let's really examine some of these fundamental boxes, because you should at least be able to say, well, it's Tinder for pets or something like that. Or was it Tinder for mentors?
Tinder for pets.
Yeah.
I like Tinder for pets.
By the way, these are all my ideas, and I'm copywriting them all, so. Cool. Channels, how will you reach your customers? So luckily, we will send you a link that has these on them. From a book called Traction, there's 19 really common paths to market for startups to grow. I don't know what stages the businesses you're going to be working with are, but it's definitely about picking the right channel for the right stage. I like to think of it in 10s. So 0 to 10, what's the best way? Well, it's not building up a website and starting a marketing campaign. It's going and speaking to people, recruiting them manually. 10 to 100, what's the best way? It might be to start paying a little bit on PPC. It might be to go to meetups, 100 to 1,000, etc. What I say is, what's worked currently? Where do they hang out? Like Adam always says, you don't want to make a new destination if you can help it. So if all of your users are complaining on Twitter, then go there and try and convince them, because rather than going and creating a new place for them to go. And it is a mix of what's worked, what do you want to test? Just like anything else, we need to test each of these channels to see if our user really hangs out there, if we can really get in front of them. And it's very much about experimenting. all of the most obvious channels are being bidded on massively by all the big companies, and actually it's usually in one of the more offshoot channels that you will find some success. What will also happen is founders will write free things in here and then go do free completely different things quite frequently. So this is really about scalability, in my opinion. So you might not have to worry about it as they're getting the company started, but as you're moving in, especially if you're going for investment, etc., it's good to know at least one channel that's going to continuously provide results. I like to encourage direct sales, personally. I just think nothing makes up for the founder being face-to-face, talking passionately about the problem.
That's a really good point. It indicates also that the appetite for the founders to get out the door, get out of the building, they come back and go, right, it's going to be SEOs and PPC, and so it's all paid at a distance stuff. And it's like, well, or just roll up your sleeves, go out and speak to 5 people on the street.
Exactly.
I found that the other week I needed to build a user panel. She went to Westfield in London and just sat with a clipboard for all day, actually all two days, full weekend, and she got 200 people signed up to a thing. I'm like, fantastic.
Yep.
You know?
You guys use the Google Sprint, and that's only 5, isn't it? So detailed.
Yeah, so Google Sprint is, I don't know if you guys have used those before. It's like go from go from idea to prototype tested with customers in 5 days. And on the 5th day, they say if you can get 5 people to look at your product, you'll get like 80% of your UX insights. But the key thing being, you wouldn't put all that money into a prototype on the basis that some marketing campaign is going to generate users down the line. You just have to tackle these things head on, which is almost always getting out the building. And that might be a hesitancy you see, but you just can't build a business in the dark.
That's a really good indicator.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of what we do is actually, it's not science. it's
Pushing
actually
people out the door, yeah.
Understanding the profile of the founder and actually being able to demonstrate the attributes that will make a good founder.
Obviously, there are certain businesses, if you are maybe a video game company or a very online-based company, that you could get away with leveraging mostly online tactics. I think for anything B2B especially, you just got to get out there and speak to the owners of the businesses and the people who feel the pain. What did we put for Facebook? Yeah, so obviously everyone's favourite is to be viral, but not every company can, should, or will be viral. Word of mouth is when you know you're doing a really good job, but it's not a channel that you can really scale up or down, so I don't like to allow word of mouth onto the lean canvases I look at. I say it's a byproduct of us doing everything else well, but if I said, okay, here's another £1 million, I want you to scale up the growth of this company, you can't put that into word of mouth. So viral is, I'm quite skeptical. Until you see people actually talking about your product and referring it, it's off the table. What other ways can we use to stimulate? Facebook's lucky in a way. It's the perfect business because why would you be retained? Because your friends are on it. So what are you going to do? Go add your friends to it. But there's not many companies like that. You know, Uber isn't necessarily viral. Even stuff like Deliveroo, where they give you the vouchers, that's not virality. It's affiliate marketing, and it's giving you kind of benefits for referral. Very few things are actually viral. Luckily, Facebook was for them, which led to their huge growth for little money. And again, advertisers, if you want to target students, I'm assuming they had to go to the doors and knock and like everyone else and pitch why their advertising model was better than any other. I don't think it's something you're necessarily going to read online or get an ad for. The bottom is the finances. So obviously, this is very high level for a financial review. And actually, it's more about, okay, how do you think you're going to make money? What are the revenue streams that need to be tested? My favorite advice on this box is, look, most startups will fail to ever fully exploit one revenue stream. So why is there 5 in this box where we're going to do ads and we're going to do a referral fee and a subscription and a commission? All it means is I don't know how I'm going to get people to pay. And for me, it's not, many companies can grow before they achieve revenue. That's fine. It's a proven model, especially for technology. But it's such a strong position to be in, having taken even any amount of revenue to prove that people will pay for the service you're offering. It's a huge bonus when you walk into an investor. It puts you in a much more powerful position. And even if it's not the revenue stream you think you're going to exploit later, even if you think you're going to do advertisement once you get to 1 million users, you must be doing something now to deliver value. So will someone give you a tenner? Will someone take some cash out of the pocket and give it to you? It doesn't have to be the perfect model. We found a founder the other day who couldn't get subscription to work on Stripe, so we just started charging people £100 one-off fee, and then they access their product. It's not the perfect revenue stream. You're probably not going to create a scalable business off of it, but he's proven that people will pay for access to his solution.
Yeah, so the other way to think of it is, there's a VC post last week, which I found really interesting. They say you're never going to know lifetime value, cost of sale at this point, but what you say is, this is what we know now, this is what we want to find out. If we do, with both of those two things, this is what we think will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a really pragmatic way of sort of detailing that sort of revenue side of things.
Exactly. You can kind of spot when people are being a bit unrealistic. If I was pitching you a music platform for £100 a month, well, that the Spotify's out there and there's lots of free music, so you'd have to, argue the case there a little bit. Maybe I could convince you. I'd say, well, I've got really high quality. It's live streaming direct from artists. Give them the chance to explain it, but it's very much use existing models that are out there. If someone for instance, for Facebook, their advertising fee a couple of years ago you were worth about $9 to them as a user. So if someone tells me that their advertising platform is going to produce $100 a user or pounds a user, I know that that's probably not going to work. So I would always advise, pick one, go see if you can get someone to pay you it. If it happens easily, then you're charging too little. If it doesn't happen at all, you might be charging too much. But don't put it off until year 2, year 3 to finally go out and figure it out. The last thing I'll say with this is once you've got a model that looks fairly reasonable, so yeah, I'm charging $9.99 a month now for my music platform service, you can work out some basic market numbers based off of that. If they're thinking of taking investment, just so you know, you are looking for something that can pay back the investment at least 10 times over. So if they're going to take £2 million in investment, then there needs to be a reasonable route to becoming a £20 million business. And if that includes taking 80% of market share, then that's not a reasonable route. So if they're interested in investment, you can use these boxes as long as they're filled in with reasonable evidence from the top to kind of model how realistic, how scalable, how sustainable that is. And that's when you can talk about, is the market too niche? Not because the founder fears it's too niche, but because you've actually gone through the process and said, well, actually, if you're going to charge this, which is reasonable, and you're looking at this target market, there's just not enough in this to take investment. So you're going to either have to bootstrap it, pick a new market, or work out how you're going to jump from that market to something much bigger. Cost structure, again, and we use kind of Fermi estimates here, so it doesn't have to be spot on, but if you're close to a power of 10, then at least you're reasonable. Again, it's a really good one for just spotting ignorance almost. So we've had some that have come through product development 30 grand, office and furniture 60 grand, and you're like, right, so you're going to spend twice as much on office and furniture as you are on product development. So a lot of it will just highlight some pretty flawed assumptions, and when you get innovative type of people that aren't necessarily business people, this is the box that often will highlight that quite a lot of the time. Again, you're looking for power of 10. If with this revenue stream in this market, I can make a £20 million business, then this should probably be less than £2 million. Where you get those costs for, if it's something like, I want to build an AI chatbot development platform, if you're not an expert and they're not an expert, then the same goes for any other part of this. Go find out how much it would cost. Stuff like hosting really isn't that expensive. It's not going to be a blocker. It really is development and marketing that you should worry about. If they've got office space on there, encourage them to go get a WeWork desk, or I'm sure you could take some space out here. But keep costs low on anything that isn't building product and getting in front of users. They should be your only real fixed costs. And premature scaling kills 74% of companies that raise money or something. So really, they should not be. You don't want to see a team getting assembled before the product is kind of out there and working. You definitely don't want to see a big team, and you definitely don't want to see a specialized team. So if we see a startup and it's like we've got a content writer, we've got a video person, we've got someone who does intermediary sales, it's like it's getting so big. You're looking for a small elite team who do a lot of things, and really their supply and demand, like they can't keep up with demand, is when it's time to scale. And I imagine most of the companies you see will be nowhere near company building. They're all in product development and achieving product market fit. And in that phase, again, talking to users, marketing and development is pretty much all they should be spending their money on. Yeah, so how did they make money? Obviously, your attention is worth money to advertisers, again, at about $9 a year. Their CPR, like, again, because of their advertising specificity, they have really good rates for clicks and conversions and stuff like that as well. So, key metrics. This is how are the mentees and startups you speak to going to define whether or not they're doing well. These absolutely change depending on the phase of your startup. And very much so, you know, there isn't necessarily right or wrong answers here. It's based a lot on ambition. What do they actually want to do with their company? Is this going to be a fast-growing company, or is this going to be, you know, a consultancy business? Are we in product stage? If so, then we need metrics on how the product itself is doing. If not, then we should probably set metrics on how many people we're going to go speak to and how many interviews we're going to have and what type of validation we're going to do. Sometimes if the company's a bit more advanced, there's a kind of a golden metric. So again, back to Facebook, it was something like if you find 7 friends in 7 days, you had a 90% chance of being retained on their system. So everything was geared towards finding you those friends who would accept quickly and start interacting with you. Twitter, you know, if you've ever signed up, I've signed up like 4 times, so I never used it. But the profiles they show you are very active profiles who are likely to tweet you back and start interacting, which again will lead to a large percentage chance of you retained to the system. So it's either we need metrics around validating the idea in or out, we need metrics on how the product's doing, or we figured out what the key metric is and now we need to funnel our metrics towards just achieving that. Vanity metrics, big one here. So good example, I want to get 1 million people to visit my website. But if I only get 100 of them to sign up, then that's actually not told the true story at all. I'd actually be really worried that that company had spent so much on attracting people and not converting them. So you need to kind of see through the vanity, like what's in here because you want to look good and what's in here that will tell you that the business is working. Good metrics are typically, you know, our customer acquisition is lower than what we perceive to be our lifetime value. Again, you probably might not have that, but it might be a chance to start putting that in. Or, you know, we're retaining 50% of the people that apply to us. You might be something like, if you're looking for viral marketing, you'd make the metric, well, how many friends is each person telling about, so we'd add a referral metric in. And then, yeah, monthly active users, typically the one for these tech startups is that number going up, and are you building engagement? And there's something called pirate metrics. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, AARRR.
How does it sound?
R. So thank you. Yeah, so these are the 5 kind of standardized metrics that most startups should be following that will then lead to greater insight. And they are, again, I think there's a video going around, but it's acquisition, so how many people see your product. Activation, how many of them do the first step, so make a profile or upload an item or whatever. Then we go to retention, so how many of them stay, and you have to define retention depending on that product. But if it's a travel app, they're not going to use it every day, they're going to use it when they go traveling. If it's a daily habits app, then obviously daily would be the target. Revenue, so are they getting all the way through to paying? And then finally referral, so who are they telling about this system? And what that gives you is if you know you've got a cohort of 100 people getting acquired, but only 10 are activating, then the focus of the company should be to improve that conversion rate because not enough people are getting through. If you've got 100 people acquired and 99 activated, but 2 people are retained, then you know that the retention is the issue. So this is very much about working with the startup to ask a series of questions that leads them to these kind of insights. Again, you won't have the answers because you won't have their analytics suite in front of you, but it's saying, okay, where do you think on this funnel they're falling down? What would be the best things we could improve? And if they're not getting anyone to even be acquired, then you know it's pre that funnel, and actually we need to go, all right, we need to interview people, we need to go out there and recruit. So this box, it's a bit of a shift in kind of proposition. It's where I think a lot of value can be added because most entrepreneurs don't need more ideas. They need focus and a way to test those ideas. And these metrics keep them in line. So if you set these metrics and you meet up again in 3 months' time, I would definitely recommend going through those to begin with, because they need to understand that kind of accountability culture as well. And this is the box, of course, that once you extrapolate this company out into a huge company, this is the box that goes to the boardroom, this is the box that goes to the investor meets, this is the one that goes out to staff and employees and everyone who tells us what we're doing. So we might as well build that culture in from day one, that we're going to set metrics and go from. What did we think? So here's some examples again. So you could have an ambition metric, we want to be this big, and then you work it backwards. You could be, we want to get to 1 million daily active users. For our customer, we want CPA lower than any other channel, or you could have a golden thread, which is that kind of golden metric, which is, we know, for instance, we do a thing called Meet the Founder. So someone applies on our website, and then we'll do a 20-minute, 30-minute consultation with them, doing stuff like this. The faster we can get people to that, the more likely they are to sign up to our program. So a lot of what we do is trying to make that process as efficient as possible. And then finally, the unfair advantage, why you over everybody else. A lot of startups at this phase will not have it, and that's fine, because this is about identifying risks, and a risk to a company is not having an unfair advantage. Now, what this could be, it could be the founder, if they have a specific domain expertise, if they've done extensive study into a certain field, if they're extremely well connected, if they're one of the few people who've done this before in another setting. It's rare that really, you know, if they're a product manager at Google, even though that's very impressive, there's lots of product managers at Google, so what specifically makes them right? One of our funniest ones, actually, we funded a Dungeons & Dragons app, companion to the game, and our unfair advantage was that our team had all worked in startups and technology, whereas all of our competitors were building apps in their mum's basement, unfortunately, and I'm not being derogatory, we did go around and ask them, but there was no one venture capital backing an app like that, so that made it our unfair advantage, that we had a team who were well versed in that. If there's a chance to IP and patent something, that can become one, but I don't know, I think Ian was in here earlier. He probably told you that patenting software is very difficult and typically a time-consuming, expensive process that is often out of the hands of a startup, so not that one. But if you can get a certain type of investor, you know, I'm doing a logistics business and I've got the person who started Deliveroo on my board, or someone who was high up in that regard. And like any box, this can become what? It could be empty, but we say, look, by the time we go to investment, we want to be able to articulate what our unfair advantage is. If they get pitched the same business on the same day, why are they going to pick us? And that itself can just become an empty box that needs tackling. And again, the same way you tackle it is by getting out there, talking to people, finding out what's happening in the industry, and bringing those kinds of connections on board.
Two questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
of course.
First of all, how often do you find a startup that will opt for a particular business model? Maybe, let's say, just a perpetual license, just buy the technology, you've got it good.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as they grow, they start to grab some customer base, flip that over to maybe a subscription model. How often does that happen, a change in business?
All the time.
Okay.
All the time.
Because you're constantly testing and learning, and,
Yeah.
and if you're noticing like the metrics, if you've got set specific targets, if you notice debt, you go back, re-interview your customers, go and talk and say, right, yeah, that was fine at that, but the world's moved on because I can actually now pay by contactless.
Yeah.
And just understand those.
And you might even have like a product fit where you're getting great engagement, but you haven't quite worked the business model fit out yet. And I guess Facebook would be a good example of that, where it was so free for such a long time that people didn't even know why investors were investing in it. But it wasn't until they worked out, okay, actually it's an ads model with the eyes that they were going to leverage. So yes, all the time basically.
And the second thing was related to those teams. I had somebody just this week said, you know, I'm intending to use an engineering team and product team in Eastern Europe. How often does that work?
Outsourcing super difficult. If your business is the success of it is determined on the product quality, I'd advise against it. Weigh up those cost benefits versus the risk to your business.
Mm-hmm.
Insource them every time in your office, talking, literally over the shoulder, looking at your developer. That's your business.
We've only ever used offshore models when we've had a technical person in-house who is going to completely basically work as a team with those people. So it's very important to have your person. Now, if what they need is, I don't need anything technically difficult, I need a marketplace that works like all the others out there, and I just want to test it in this market, and it would be significantly cheaper to go that way, then there is an element of that. only to get you through the door, right? So you can start building your metrics up and then go pitch for money to bring it in-house. But you might find it, especially in the Northwest, it can be very difficult to find the right developers. So it's always tempting to, and not just because of the price, literally because of the skills gap as well. But if you're not technical, trusting an agency to build your startup product. And the other reason it's difficult is they don't do iterations. So they'll give you your version 1, but then when you get all your user insight as to where this needs to be for them to use it fully, that they're not included in the price. So they're not really aligned to building a long-standing product
All
for
the
you.
time they don't have the documentation through and the
No.
IP as well, though, that's a massive thing for, you get, I'm an investor, and you get down the thing and go, well, actually you don't even own it, because they've
Right.
developed it for you.
Or
Right,
you don't
right,
even
right.
realise.
Launched it in the market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we've done that at later stages. It makes sense at some point to reduce cost to the business.
Yeah.
Where you've got to
Absolutely.
wait in a customer base.
And you know what you're going to do, deliver.
And
Yeah.
I had that feeling, but I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's a good
see
question.
people don't-
It's it's just, you can weigh up this
Yeah.
business.
But just because someone finds a good UK firm though doesn't mean that it's the right choice for them either. Like I've had startups saying, look, I just need £1 million. I've been quoted it from the firm in Manchester, and if we, I'm like, £1 million? Like I don't even know if this is a thing yet, and you want me to give you £1 million to give to those people? Like I don't know. So again, for me, until this canvas is fairly robust, I would be advising not to spend any money. Like maybe some on marketing to get in front of people, but really don't spend any money. Like take 2 months, give it time, energy, and everything, and either validate it out and come back with the same energy with another idea, or validate it in, and then you'll be able to raise the money to go give it to agencies. And that's like kind of the biggest learning curve that we have with founders.